right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Blowback roundtable. This is episode 17, and we are guestless, but we have the indomitable Carlo Parcelli from DC and Ben Toth from Hungary. Thanks for joining us, guys. Tremendous amount of activity over the weekend and today and tomorrow. Geopolitically speaking, there's a whole lot to get to. I was hoping to enter into a discussion, which I just wrote like a 3-page essay on last night, trying to focus my thoughts. Right now, that seems like a daunting exercise, but I think if we slowly tiptoe into that discussion, we could get somewhere with it. We have a viewer already sharing some.
Hi, Paulie.
Current events with us. So thanks for that, Paulie. But where do we want to begin?
I was wondering if you have a good entryway into. I think we all read this essay you talked about. It was very interesting. I never heard about this Lindsay guy, one of those guys who equates everything that is communism, that is everything that is woke. Therefore, pretty much the Biden administration in his mind is a communist regime, and it was fascinating to me. I'm wondering if you want to sort of preface that somewhere, because I have got some thoughts, some insight from the Eastern perspective. I'm always going to be more Eastern than you guys.
Yeah, no, and the title of our program as well. The title of the program is a good entryway into this discussion. So we titled today's episode "The Collapse and the Culture War." And we've addressed the culture war, and we've shared our different opinions on it throughout the history of our program. But it's a very real thing, right? There's this cultural divide in the West, and among the working class, and we have this groundswell, this increase in wokeism, identity politics, for lack of a better term. And then there's like a reaction to that. There's a conservative reaction to that. And to me, it just seems that, the culture war is something that's stage managed, for lack of a better word, by the ruling elite for the express purpose of keeping the working class, at each other's throats, and, keeping them from uniting around their shared class interests. So, I mean, just seems basic, and this seems like a basic tenet of communism and Marxism and Leninism is that the culture war is utilized and weaponized, by the ruling class to maintain control and to keep the working class from uniting. So, do we have agreement on that basic premise, or can we get a little pushback?
Not exactly. I went through when I was a kid. I went through in the 50s. I went through a culture war. I was a witness to culture war. That was a civil rights movement. That was a obvious.
I don't think that's the same thing as the culture war.
How do you differentiate it?
The civil rights movement was basically to get rights for an oppressed population. That has nothing in common with today's.
Well, sure it does. I mean, obviously, that's what LGBTQ people want. They want their basic rights. They're killed in exponentially larger numbers than the rest of the population, and they're harmed also in extra large numbers. The other culture war I was familiar with was in the 60s in the anti-war movement in Vietnam. That was a culture war too, because we were viewed. I mean, if you walked around like I look today, in 1964, you would have got your head stoved in by people who were all for the war. They couldn't find it on a map, but they were all for it. So, and that was a culture war. That was definitely there was a large dimensions of culture. I can turn my head to my left here and see a copy of Abby Hoffman's "Steal This Book," which was a lot, very influential. It told you how to become a draft dodger, how to get to Canada all that sort of thing. And there were people that were openly
You
hostile.
think those culture wars that you were familiar with were, were tried to be manipulated and weaponized in a cynical way by the ruling establishment? Did you see that happening then?
Yes. Oh yeah, that was a
On both
large part of
sides or
it.
just one side?
I mean, you have the FBI, for instance, and Hoover was obviously hostile toward Martin Luther King and Medgar Evers and Malcolm X,
Yeah,
obviously hostile toward it. But
yeah,
at the same time, when say for example the three young men were killed in, I think it was Alabama, Mississippi burning, right? In Mississippi, the FBI was instrumental in finding their bodies and eventually attempting to bring the Ku Klux Klan, along with people like the Southern Poverty Law Center and people like that who contributed a great deal to it, to bringing these people to justice, ultimately to justice. It wasn't the kind of justice you would expect for the violence of the murder. But yes, there. So you had you had the yes, the elites playing both sides of the fence, and back then, sure, and of course with the with the '60s Vietnam movement, you had the capitalists playing a huge role. I mean, look at the irony of the anthems of music for that period. They're all, you know, Dylan signed a contract with Columbia fucking Records. I used to be in the record business, and that was the largest label. If you got a Columbia signing, so that in
yeah.
a way,
Yeah,
the
something
capital
happened there, I think.
the capitalists weren't afraid of it. They didn't fear it because they knew they could control it. And so,
Exactly.
and Creedence Clearwater Revival, you mentioned Unfortunate Son, but my favorite song, "The Fixin' to Die Rag" by Country Joe and the Fish, that sort of thing. It has it at Phil Oaks. They have their impact, but by the same token, it was easily co-opted by capitalist culture, that by the
See,
capitalists themselves, because there was money to be made, and
Who
wherever there's
was
money to be made, you could find that.
I think
who was
that's a very salient point. But go on, Billy.
well, who was the Republican operative that talked about the Southern strategy and how the Southern strategy morphed from saying the N word over and over again to talking about states' rights and
Oh
forced
shit! Yeah,
busing and stuff like that?
George
I know.
Wallace,
I know the quote, but I
Who?
don't know them.
George Wallace,
George Wallace. That
David
yeah. That
Duke.
Yeah, it
well,
Duke
changed
is
form,
I'm
but
not. I'm thinking about one particular quote where he discussed the Southern strategy and he said it's no longer in our interest to yell the N word really loud because of the changing people's changing values, and so now instead of doing that, we've adopted this other more tolerant kind of kind of strategy, and I think that's just morphed. I think that's just that same strategy is morphed.
well,
But yeah,
But
you
that's the
could see.
salient point. It's a repetition, exactly what Carlo said, as it got sort of bypassed or co-opted by capitalist forces. The new left, we know the CIA memos saying anarchism is something that we can very well exploit through vines, and so what do you call it, confusion, especially through drugs, music, egotistical traits. And that is exactly what happened. It lost its teeth. Now you can get Che Guevara t-shirts, you can go worship the MLK shrine or whatever it is, that massive that beautiful statue, but it's absolutely bereft of the real message that was there once. And I see exactly the same happening to, I guess, what we call the wokeism, both sides of it, culture war.
Yeah. Just to give it a contemporary example,
So,
if you watch television and you can bear commercials, you will see in the commercials there's a vast number. I don't want to say majority of mixed couples, African American and white, Asian American and white. There's always a white person involved generally. I mean, it could be Asian American and African American, but anyway, commercials. What could be more capitalist corporate than commercials? So what are they doing there? What's their motive for doing that?
Money.
Money, exactly. These people, African Americans now have, even though they earn 20 times less than, or they have 20 times less the assets than white people in this country, they still have enough clout economically to influence people. But the corporations have to know that they're poking at something, that that by doing that they're driving a wedge between uh, 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 a white MAGA oriented people and the minority communities. They know that that's what they're doing, and that's very cynical on their part. Also, very profitable.
Yeah, that's it. I
So,
mean, that's an interesting
Very.
take. I wouldn't. I honestly don't think that very many MAGA people oppose interracial marriage. I mean,
you've never sat down with my cousins and watched television.
I don't think your
I
cousins are
understand
representative.
your dead cousins. Yes.
Yes, or my dead uncles and my cousins.
So
I don't know
what
what to
makes you
tell you,
think
Billy
that?
Bob. I really don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, no. What, Carlo? What makes you think your cousins are representative of MAGA? I
Well,
don't
I
think
mean,
they are.
I'm just trying to. I'm just trying to. What makes you think you have a handle on what MAGA thinks?
I'm Eastern
Well,
European. I can't get that, but most of the
it's just
people
my
that
own observations. Like we
Well,
have a
that's my.
disagreement.
This is my own observation.
Okay, so
okay,
so you
as long as
you
we
really
can keep,
believe that your cousins are representative of MAGA, and that so most MAGA people oppose interracial marriage.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have used the word MAGA, but that
Yeah.
seems that this experience of mine goes back 75 years. I mean, I've seen it all my life with white people.
Yeah.
It's just endemic.
Yeah. No, I
I
mean,
don't
I
know
think.
I don't know what to tell you. There wouldn't have been a civil rights movement if it hadn't been a problem.
Well,
of course. And
You
again,
know
what
what?
you just
so I
what you
think people's
described is that the
attitudes have changed over time, and we've seen that. Like as attitudes change, the strategy for class division changes,
Well,
and the
you,
attitudes have
but
become more liberal and become more accepting of things like interracial marriage, which is by far and away. I mean, if I could pull up a poll, just the first poll that I find on Google, and I'm telling you, there's very, very, very little support for not allowing, unless you're in Israel. Go
I
ahead,
think
Ben.
you're right, but I think Carlo's larger point, which I also agree with, that the underlying structural issues, they just remained. The surface, the form, Barack Obama's black, so if all the blacks are emancipated. That was the form. The surface changed. The underlying, I think, Carlo can correct me if I'm wrong, issues largely remain the same when it comes to issues like police brutality, disproportionate jailing of black guys, if that's
Segregated
let,
schools.
let's you can roll back these gains by people, and I think there's an intention to do a lot of that. Now, if you want a larger sample, just look at the crowds. Look at the crowds that were on at January 6th. How many African Americans did you see in that crowd January
oh, come
6th?
on. And how many guns? That's not a very good.
No, it is. It's the MAGA crowd. That's the MAGA crowd.
That is the MAGA crowd. That's true. There are
But
small business
how
owners.
many African Americans did you see, other than the occasional person working at the Capitol? None. I don't know what else to tell you guys.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know. I don't know what else to tell you.
well,
I mean, if you
if
don't
you're
believe
trying to
it,
convince us that
if you
MAGA
don't,
is opposed
if
to
you
interracial marriage, I mean, I don't think you need to continue because I don't think that's true, and you're not going to
okay,
convince
fine.
me otherwise.
You can have your belief about it. I don't
Okay.
care.
We
I
have
really
given.
don't. I don't
We
give
have.
a rat's rectum. I know what my eyes see. Listen,
Yeah.
I'll give you another anecdote. I know I won't have to convince you. We used to have neighbors, and they were an interracial couple. They lived across the street, and they moved. And one day, Lynn came back to visit, and she was an African American woman. And get this, she's an opera singer. She has a brilliant voice. So she knocks on my door. I say, "Come in." She comes in. She sits. She sits in the chair in my living room, and we're talking. And she goes, you know, she starts to talk about her husband's family, and how when they would go to visit, there would be this tension between members of his family and her, and she felt very uncomfortable about it. and that would counter what you were saying. Because I believe Lynn is an accurate observer of what was going on in that room at the time.
I mean, often,
And I know that's just anecdotal,
people
but
feel
still.
that way about their in-laws. I mean, if you want
Well,
to infer that it's
I don't
because
think
she's
it was an
black, that's
in-law
up to
thing.
you.
She specifically said it was a racial thing. Okay, she said
Yeah.
it was a racial thing.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
that
Okay.
anecdote I will
that's
not
anecdotal,
back away
like you
from. You
acknowledge.
can have your beliefs. I don't care. Okay, you can have your delusions because I consider them delusions.
Well, I
If
mean,
you can
why
have them,
don't they
I don't
admit?
care.
Do you think they want to hide their beliefs? Is that why the polling data doesn't support your assertion? Because they
Yes,
try and
they
hide it?
lie.
Okay.
When somebody sticks a microphone under their nose, they lie.
Because,
Absolutely,
okay.
they lie.
Okay. Let me jump in as the native Easterner, the Eastern European. We don't have the same racial demographics as you, nor the same history. What we have, the closest to that is I don't think 2 or 3% of us who are Roma, the gypsies in Hungary, who are also disproportionately in poverty and in jail. There's issues to be solved there, but I'd never seen like Hungary described as a white supremacist thing, but I really don't have the good insight on this issue. When it concerns 2 or 3% of the population, it goes under my radar. The same goes, I'm sorry, and I'm going to be unabashed about this, for the trans community. It was, I think, less than 1% of the population 2 years ago, and now the schools report there's up to 20%, and even more when it comes to depression. LGB has always been our heritage, even in Hungary. In 1987 we had the Queen concert, and I just asked my parents, why is he dressed like that? It wasn't the fancy stuff, the prima donna stuff, just the white. What do you call it? We call it athletes, the sleeveless shirt and the big fucking armpit hair. And Mum said, "Oh, well, we'll explain that to you later." Yeah, we had homosexual people here. We had little couples. They had civil unions. It was fine. What we didn't have is mutilation of children who can decide what they are and may be taken away from parents. And if you don't believe that's real, I'm sorry. I have a bridge to sell you. That is real. And I guess we are much, much closer to Russia, and happily so, in that if you touch the children, fuck off. You can fuck off with any ideology you have. And I think in that regard of the culture war, it might be stirred by this or that part of the top, because you can see the admiralty of the US dressing up in skirts, absolutely looking ridiculous. And you can call me, Dust can call me a European right-wing tailist. I can say the same as you. I don't care. This goes against fundamental humanity.
But it's also a democratic society, or an expression thereof. People are free to make that choice.
When you're 4, you don't make that choice. Your parents are there to nurture
their parents
you.
have control, so they're free to make that choice for the child.
Yeah, once you're 20, I have no issues.
If that's what they envision.
So,
that's what they envision.
But it's like someone saying that the degrowth thing is a myth. The population shortening, which was there, it's the first white paper from the Business Society, that is the World Economic Forum, is not real. It's the first thing you get. You get a big detailed book of the plan. Like the pharmaceuticals, I know. The problem is
cultural anthropology went there a long time ago, as I expressed on this show. I mean, Native American cultures here very often had all kinds of gradations of sexuality.
Oh, so did Rome. Europe has a huge heritage.
Yes, of course. But now science is demonstrating that that's biological. There are people with different chemical responses and going on in their nature, in their body.
Except when you're 6-year-old and you have a really bad day and have to do too much homework, and you decide maybe I'm better off as a girl, and mutilate your chances of ever reproducing. You can't tell me that's
I don't know if that really actually happens. I know here the process to do that is very long and arduous, and it not only involves science and medicine, but it also involves legal action too. I mean, you have to get permission from the courts and that sort of thing. So I don't know if that's been blown out of proportion or not, because I don't study it that closely. But I kind of think that that's kind of right-wing hype. I think that's more hype than it is actuality.
Yeah, it's definitely, the cultural conservatives in this country definitely point out those kinds of things. and they really resent, this having these, this trans ideology shoved down their throats. And then they say the same thing that Ben was saying, and that, the Russian people are saying, that, it's about protecting the kids, and that, this kind of thing should not be shoved down the throats of kids, and they're wondering why. And so they're coming up with these explanations to explain why we're seeing this,
And
seemingly
that's where it gets
overt,
wild. Yeah, go on, Billy.
the seemingly overt pushing of wokeism, onto our society from the top down, right? It's in a large extent, it's from the top down, and it's not like a grassroots thing where just guys like us are sitting around and then all of a sudden it gains traction. Let's shove trans issues down kids' throats. Go ahead.
Maybe it's a true expression. Maybe it's a true expression of the overall sexuality of the population.
Yeah, supported by
maybe it's a kind of reckoning.
Supported by the media. Supported by the media, the entertainment industry, by geopolitics at large. Seriously, the largest financial donors in this world support this, and you're saying it's from the ground up? I don't think so. But
I'm not saying it's from the ground up. I'm saying it might just be biology. Biology allowed to express itself.
Allowed to express itself. Well, that's not what I see. But
obviously, in cultures like yours and Russia, there's been a suppression of that. And here there's been a suppression of that. There still is a suppression of that.
I'm going to add another wrinkle and a little bit of good news at the end, okay? Because in Hungary, it's true. We have gay couples. We have gay bars. We have a rich, you can say maybe underground, but it's not suppressed in any way, a culture of this sort of thing. But again, we have child protection laws. But if you sit down and talk to people, both heterosexual, I mean, just in cultural, if you talk to most of the grandmas, the granddads who still live in this era right now, they will absolutely be repulsed, as would be Russia, at this foreign entity, like, for example, pride. That is not the same thing as celebrating true love, celebrating love in whatever form it comes, which is what the classic message was. But the wrinkle, the good news to it, you sit down with them, both, I guess, what did you call them, cultural conservatives, or this right-wing thing is obscuring things to me, but they're cultural conservatives. But they basically agree with me on 80% of when it comes to workers' things, like what it was in the old country, basically having a better future, receiving stuff if you work hard, and just gaining and gaining, 80% of those things. And what we suffer from is this little boxification. We're in our little box looking at that little box, which is the screen or on the phone or the telly, and we think we're alone. I think that's what happens on both ends of this spectrum. If you go out to actually talk to people, you find enormous middle ground. And of course, I think in America, you'd find that most people have working class politics, but they think they're totally alone with this. I mean, I'm not going to comment on the US woke LGBT thing, but I know that in my country that is just no chance of succeeding, whether with Orban, whatever you think of him, or with the opposition. It just has no chance culturally.
So the point of my essay was to kind of do an expose on a particular narrative that is quite enticing to cultural conservatives, because it panders to the anti-communist bias that has been shoved down, their throats, their entire lives and for generations, really. So the narrative, the explanation for this abrupt implementation of wokeism from the top down and being shoved down everyone's throat is that it's part and parcel of a vast communist conspiracy, to really destroy society and eventually take over the world and rule it under a one world communist government. Now, there's a problem with that, right? I mean, that's
many.
Yeah, that's wild. That's where it gets wild.
But again, if you have been indoctrinated to see communism as evil and the source of, genocide and mass murder and poverty and despair, as everybody in the West has been, then you're open to that interpretation. But it hinges on, number one, the fact that communism is a ideology of the elite that was created by the elite in order to, pursue this divide and conquer strategy for global domination. So it gets back to 1917, when Lenin received some support in Germany and was, funded and put back on a train to spread his propaganda in Russia to formulate the revolution. So,
well, to get them out of the war, but yeah, instead he formulated a revolution. Yeah.
So, and then, and then the same thing, Anthony Sutton wrote a book called Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, identifying Wall Street as one of the prime supporters of the Bolshevik Revolution and financing it. And so these are little tidbits of historiography, fake history, that the right clings to, and they believe these lies, and it causes them to have this worldview where, the elites are the communists, like Trump says, right? Trump is always calling them communists and fascists, as if there's no distinction between the two. So it's just a total, dumbing down of actual rational political views, and it's obfuscatory. It obfuscates things and it confuses people. And then when people are confused and can't tell up from down, then then they've been disenfranchised and they don't know even what to advocate for. And I mean, this is just a big problem, and I try and articulate it in that essay. But I mean, it deserves discussion. It deserves scrutiny. And do you guys have any thoughts on anything I've said thus far?
I do. Carlo, I was wondering. Okay.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Ben.
Two other phrases I see. I think you drew attention to one of them. Is not even communist. They don't always say that, but they always like to say collectivists. That's very thing. That's not. I've never heard it in left or communist circles in my life. I've never heard collectivist, but I see this from people like Ben Shapiro, Jordan B. Peterson, that kind of crowd. They use this collectivist. And the other thing, especially in Eastern Europe, you also hear, and that's when it gets wild, the Judeo-Bolshevik. So they're supposed to be, the communism is sort of the traditional 1930s German ideology, pretty outspokenly, because it's their propaganda, the same that's used in Ukraine. Let's just put it that way. Okay. And it's just fascinating to me that people can put in their mind that Kamala Harris is the big Marxist, so is Joe Biden, at war, currently just chips and economic war with China, who are also the big bad Marxists. I don't know why. They're the same, I guess. They are leaves from the same tree, but they can't get along. I don't know how they put these two things together.
Yeah, that's the biggest contradiction, which I attempted to point out in the essay. It's like, if you're conceptualizing communism as a plan for the elites, as a creation of the elites, why are the Western elites, doing their utmost to destroy and weaken and subvert China? So, I mean, that's one of many glaring contradictions.
Yeah, it's certainly different than the contradiction between the conflict, the millennia-long conflict between Vietnam and China. It's an entirely, it's I guess an attempt to make the two somehow equal, but they're not.
They have clerical disagreements, basically, compared to.
It's just, I mean, it's absurd when you think about it. I mean, on the one hand, they want to go after Joe Biden for all these insider deals in Ukraine, which with the son, which is legitimate. I think they did, and those are capitalist. Those are capitalist maneuvers. They're capitalist moves. They have nothing to do with communism. But then in the same breath, they'll put a microphone under somebody's nose, and he'll go, "Well, Joe Biden's a communist." It's just
without a second thought.
The inability for critical thinking, and I'm going to waver. Just allow me this, but my wife has a theory about what happened, and in the 60s, people like her and myself became very politicized for obvious reasons, Vietnam War. And then she says that after that, for her younger siblings, drugs were introduced into the school, and critical thinking was eliminated from the schools. She went to a school where she went to a high school where they read William Burroughs' Naked Lunch. That's how progressive that fucking school was.
I don't know.
And then it changed overnight when the kids started to become anti-war activists. And so, and then drugs were introduced into the schools, as they were into the ghettos and all of society, basically by the Central Intelligence Agency, and the culture was further, and the people were further dumbed down, and they were deprived of the ability to critically think. And I think we're going through like the third generation of that now, where on the one hand they complain that China is graduating so many more engineers than the United States, and Russia's creating almost as many with half the population. Yet at the same time, they're 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 not willing to educate their people, to think critically, because they're afraid what will happen ultimately because of what happened during the 60s. And that's your theory, and I think it has some merit to it, because I don't find a lot of solid critical thinking among my brethren in this country. But I just thought I'd throw that out.
No,
Go ahead.
Good theory. Also, shout out to your wonderful wife, who we've always heard, but we've never seen her on screen, and would love to one day. Because the drug thing, Mao Ning, the spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry, said that the USA comprises of 5% of the world population, maybe less, and they account for 80% of the drug use. So I think there's a real aspect to that is just current. It maybe the third iteration, as you said, but maybe it's just never stopped. And you can definitely see the lack of, education. Something I've seen, I don't have it in my notes, but Boris Johnson sat down with a Ukrainian interviewer, and he said the most crazy things. He said something like, along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, that basically the United States and the UK won the Second World War with the help of Ukraine. Basically, that was his conclusion. That shows me the lack of education. He was an Eton boy, the highest education in Britain, and obviously he's propagandizing. But it's just there's a whole lot of wrong if you don't have the basic even facts at your fingertips. And I think there's a huge encouragement. Obviously, the media is all about this, not for you not to have the basic facts, and then you have no other choice but to be confused. That was a big part of your essay that I want to pick out. As in the 60s, when the CIA exploited anarchism for their needs, they always have the elites when they launch, let's not call it a culture war, a psychological offensive. They have attainable goals, okay? And at that point, it was to sow confusion with egotistical trends, with sex, with drugs, rock and roll, all that stuff, to veer away from the dangerous message. And right now, it looks like a lot of their goal is exactly the same, is confusion. It doesn't look like it attains a lot more to me, other than to be docile at home, drooling at a fucking screen and not reaching out to your fellow human being instead. Any thoughts on the actual goals of this?
Yeah, the disenfranchisement of the working class majority that they see as a threat.
I wanted to say, while you get robbed, yeah, obviously.
Yeah,
well, more of your rights just get taken away, and that includes a lot of the small business. Sorry.
Yeah, how do we solve that? How do we educate people?
So, and that's, I think we need to understand what's taking place. We need to understand the indoctrination and the propaganda narrative that's being, disseminated and accepted. And then we need to, I think, logically and rationally show why this way of thinking is not, that has no basis in actual reality. And, I think a lot of people you're not going to reach that way, but there's actual people who I want to think like myself. Like I wasn't born, having a particular understanding. So like I was honestly trying to figure out, what is going on. And, you have 100 narratives to choose from, and you got to figure out which one is the most reality based. And so I think we can help people that are engaged in that same kind of, truth seeking and trying to understand things. And I think those people exist on the cultural left and the cultural right. And that's why, I don't want to write anyone off. But, the cultural right looks at the woke ideology, and they always refer to it as a cult, right? And it's the inclusive. They have like three buzzwords. The woke, the wokeists have these three buzzwords. What is it? It's inclusivity,
diversity, inclusivity. What's the third one? Come on.
It fails me. But my point is, when the conservative right, the cultural right, attacks them as a cult of wokeism and says those things are just cult buzzwords. I point out that the right wing, the conservative, the cultural conservatives have their own buzzwords. So they have their own buzzwords and they have their own cult. And those buzzwords are, anti-authoritarianism, anti-collectivism, individualism, volunteerism, and there's some other buzzwords. But it's the same kind of cult, just being pushed from the top down on one people, just like it's being pushed from the top down on the other people. And there's merits, there's merits to cultural conservatism and there's merits to cultural liberalism. That's why I don't take sides in the culture war, because, everybody's different. And I don't think you're going to bridge cultural gaps. But what we can do is, agitate for a unity on class lines of cultural conservatives and cultural, liberals.
I'm going to say straight ahead, I have no solutions for the US. There's too much complexity and baggage that I'm just not aware of. It's too big for me. But I have very decent, I think, understanding of the Eastern European case. Not sure you can learn from that, but I can go into that. But first I wanted to say shout out to someone, Caleb Maupin, you probably know him, the Center for Political Innovation. Some people have issues with him. I don't care. What he did is reached out to, do you know Laurie Spencer? She's a very libertarian kind of voice, someone who people would find, I guess, right wing, because we can imagine the economic underpinnings of libertarianism to be silly. But basically, what I see is just a woman in, I don't know what age she was, but she is facing this culture shock of a huge changing world, facing financial difficulty and trying to find solution and learning. It's called Strange Bedfellows, the little things they do, these talks, maybe podcasts they do together. It's one of the most respectful engagements I've seen in a while. And they, again, agree on 80%. They're not fanatics like some people are who say, that's right-wing white supremacist, you got to cancel that. And Caleb is a red fascist who needs to die. You've heard these both of these. They actually are doing the work that I can really, really respect. That's something I would prefer far beyond just, I'm not going to talk to you, name calling,
Yeah, dialogue and communication is key. And I haven't watched that particular stream that you're discussing. And I'm not
even 4 or 5
sure
of them now, but it's
who that lady is. But I've seen a lot of Caleb Maupin's discussions with the Brars and others. And he had Scott Ritter, at one of his events. He's doing good work of reaching across the cultural divide. And
let me just say, first, I am not Jackson Hinkle. I'm not Hazardine. Neither is Caleb. We are all entitled to have our own view of communism, of history, of things, and they're all different. I just want to pick him up because he was doing the most humane outreach I've ever seen. There's a reason why Rage Against the War Machine was cancelled by what is called the left. A lot of these, organizations that go back 20 years and they have their professional managerial class, basically paid academic people who say, no, that's right wing. What do you call it? The Red Brown Alliance. You probably heard that word before, phrase before, and they wanted it cancelled because we can't have that. I don't like to shit on other people or praise them, but I thought that's something to bring up when it comes to the U.S. situation.
Well, I think the task, I shouldn't say our task, is maybe impossible. Billy Bob is a person who engages people more than I know of anyone else on the internet. I mean, he really was willing to go to the mattresses, as the mafia said, with these people, but my experience, Well, I'm getting a little old and tired of it, but I used to complain to my wife that, you know, I can't convert the world one person at a time, and that and you know, and you would I would engage people, and once I frustrated them with facts, which is very easy to do when you guys have this instrument, Google. I would tell people all the time, you know, you really got to get Google. You don't have to ask me what the word means. You can Google it. But one guy was so frustrated with me. He started when I replied to him rationally, like Billy Bob is suggesting. He would hold his cat up, literally hold his cat up in front of the camera, and that was his response. A cat, his cat. So that's and what I'm getting at is that there is an enormous industry out there called Madison Avenue. It
Yes.
got its birth with Ivy Lee when he rehabilitated the reputation. I oh, I can't. One of the great robber barons after the Ludlow massacre, after they killed after they killed 106 or 110 working people, just slaughtered them at the
Mm.
Ludlow massacre. Ivy Lee comes along and he does a PR thing for is it Carnegie? I don't might have been Rockefeller. I'm sorry, Mike.
One
My
of the big money
one of the
families.
big
Yeah.
ones, one of the huge ones. And then you get in 1928, you get, of course, we've talked about this before, Edward Bernay's Propaganda, which is a textbook. And he sounds like Edmund Burke on the first page. He says, ordinary people are too stupid to govern themselves. It has to be
There's a lot
governed
of that
by,
right now.
yeah, a system of elites, a small system of elites. It's textbook stuff. And they've got billions and billions of dollars. I mean, if you want to get your reputation set in any particular direction, all you have to do is go to these firms on Madison Avenue, and there are flacks who will put out the propaganda that will make you look like say the Blessed Mother or whatever you want to look like to the public, and the public will swallow it. And it's inundated. We're inundated with it everywhere. It's I don't know how to combat that. I'm getting tired. I'm frustrated. You know, 50 years of it, and I
Yeah.
don't.
Shout out to Rosalie once again. I mean,
Yes,
you keep
yes.
citing her, so we
I get all of my ideas from her. Let's face it.
fantastic. I never thought this is what I'd begin with, but Tucker Carlson had an interview again with 150 million views with Javier Milei, which is the Argentine new runner-up or hopeful. I think he's ahead in the Argentine president. We can switch to other world events, but I just want to reflect on Hungary and this issue, the culture wars. Javier Milei, he said he hates leftists. We can't get along with leftists. We're going to kill them. He's from the Libertarian Party. And I just say to people, 2 years ago, I would have said, yeah, that's a Pinochet 2.0. Fuck him. And that was still my reflex at first. It really was. But then it dawned on me, I don't know anything about the Libertarian Party or the internal politics. I have issues with him on policy. He wants to dollarize everything and basically go with the IMF, the world. Anyway, that's not the fundamental reaction is, when Orban got elected, so back to Eastern Europe, right? There was a big election last year, March, so the SMO was underway. And there was enormous amounts of money from the US and the EU to get this umbrella organization, this alphabet of opposition to get him out. Fuck him. We would have become basically Poland 2.0. We have the same history. We have a very huge anti-communist, rightist sort of Christian tradition. And overwhelmingly, everybody voted for this guy because he said, no, fuck that. We have to look to the future. We have to look to peace. And in that moment, I mean, a lot of things had changed. There's this new synergy where I talk to actual old school communists, not many of them left, who were in the old system, still alive, who built the streets are named after the builders, those kinds of people. And he said, holy shit, I wouldn't have voted for anyone else. And there's a strange synergy that's happening also in Russia. I wanted to pick out because it might be similar to what you guys are going through. There's obviously everybody has just 100% support around Putin. who was the candidate who wants to get along with the West. He's kind of a cultural conservative. But on the other hand, I've been trying to study this. The KPRF, the Communist Party of Russia, second largest party, huge, and Gennady Zyuganov is Orthodox. Something in my childhood I would have hated, because I remember the history of the Catholics' involvement in Hungary and our revolution. It was very, very much on the wrong side. But these things change, and I'm just trying to study it. People are trying to disrupt this study. But we're not Soviets. Neither is Russia. But they're going in a decent direction with a new kind of synergy. And I don't understand how people either say that's... no, that's not the point I wanted to make. I understand when Orban says we hate the left. He's talking about the left of the last 30 years, which is EU-loving liberals, expats in Brussels. That is what he's talking about. I'm wondering if the context is different in Javier Milei's Argentina, because it sure as shit in Russia was the same. Those fucking West-loving liberals, that's not KPRF. KPRF is very, very happy at home. They wanted the intervention in Ukraine, and they fought for this for 8 years. It's very different, what people call in different circles what they call the left. That's a point I wanted to make, which might be useful.
And it's a problem. I mean, various definitions of leftism, communism, and seemingly innocuous and good terms like volunteerism, individualism, freedom, liberty. Like, who could oppose those things, right? But yeah, it's
the distinction. The left, for example, in Hungary and Eastern Europe, is the Social Democrats. Some of them ours were called the Socialist Party, and at every step of the way, the last 30 years, they betrayed us. They sold us out. They deserve every bit of punishment that comes their way. So I know when Orban said, fuck the left, he didn't mean me. He sure shit didn't mean the old commies, because he was one of them at some point. That doesn't matter. But he meant these guys. And that sort of, it's not a purification, but, sanitation of Russia has also taken place. 300,000 of these fuckheads left Russia after the SMO? It's become a healthier, more decent place,
Yeah, in the West, there's this tremendous indoctrination, an anti-communist indoctrination. It goes back more than 100 years, and so in a sense, these narratives, these top-down narratives, pander to that anti-communist, anti-socialist indoctrination, and it helps these people define communism and socialism in a way that has nothing to do with how we understand actual communism and socialism. And then you have the left, right? And they're indoctrinated to be anti-socialist and anti-communist and to despise the Soviet Union, to despise communist China. And they're on the left, and a lot of them call themselves socialists. So what you have is a facilitation of this cultural divide where, the top-down narratives both end up being anti-actual existing socialists, right? And on the left, on that side of the culture war, you can trace that back, as Gabriel Rockhill does, to, the Frankfurt School and the French School of Critical Theory, where these people were promoted who had this critical theory that was ultimately anything but socialism, anything except socialism. They're the utmost and total, critics of capitalism. But what distinguishes them from actual socialists and actual communists is that they say, well, there's no fixing that. Capitalism is really, really, really bad. It's just not as bad as socialism. And so that's kind of the problem with the Western Marxism, because they don't have to them the solution is anything but socialism. So they have all these solutions, land back, and all this other stuff. Anyway,
I don't want to belabor this, but I want to take issue with the Rockhill thing, because
let's not.
I've actually read Derrida and Foucault and Adorno and Horkheimer and Walter Benjamin. These people are not, their essential nature and the essence of their writing is not to to create a dichotomy between capitalism and Marxism or any aspect of socialism. They're philosophers, and their thinking has only maybe, I don't want to put a percentage on it, but a small percentage to talk about the dichotomy that Rockhill introduces. And and you can read Of Grammatology by Derrida. You will see not one word that relates to that. You can read Deleuze and Guattari. You will see nothing that would that Bill you could associate with the dichotomy that Rockhill is laying out. Nothing. Now with Horkheimer and Adorno,
Now
like
that's the two I've
Dialectic
read.
of Enlightenment, you can see that, but it's kind of brilliant. It's literary. I think the explanation that Adorno and Horkheimer give, where they use Homer and Odysseus sailing past the sirens, is brilliant. Only Odysseus gets to hear the sound of the sirens. Everybody else has to have wax in their ears, so that they're the guys that are rowing past. And in a way, it's a very complicated expression, because what would happen if all of them could hear the song of the sirens? They would be dashed upon the rocks. Okay. And they
Okay.
even have to lash Odysseus to the mast so he can't be seduced into plunging himself into the water and dashed upon the rocks. So it's far richer than the presentation that Rockhill is giving, even when it is an expression
Well,
of these. So I have the suspicion that Rockhill has never read these people. I
okay.
don't
Well,
think he's ever read them.
I read the Two-Dimensional Man, Planned Obsolescence. So a basic idea. I think they thought they were doing the right thing. These Frankfurt Schoolers, right? Yeah.
I thought.
But
Let me just interject.
I'm saying they can be literary geniuses, and I really enjoyed Odysseus and the Sirens and the Wax. But in the end, the end effect of their works was absolutely to have a left that is separate from what was then the traditional, the Soviet, the Eastern Bloc, the international left, and it succeeded splendidly. I mean, that's undeniable.
I'm not even sure that they were interested in left-right dichotomy. I mean, when Adorno came to the United States, he hated it, and he went back as soon as he could, because it was Disneyland.
Enjoyed U.S. money for a long damn old time back in Germany.
Well, whatever, I mean, I don't know what the circumstances were. I was never interested in what he got money wise. I was interested in his thought, what he put into his writing. But
if it doesn't, if the point of it isn't to explain how we can improve our situation, I'm not sure it's worth investing one's lifetime to study. I mean,
look, it's not the kind of nuts and bolts you seem to be suggesting exists.
Yeah.
It's a deep dive, and I like a deep dive. I get bored with the nuts and bolts prospecting. Listen, I was a businessman, and I still am. My motto about business was, business is banal. Business just has two columns. It's a column on the left. That's what I bought the product for. It's a column on the right. That's what I sold the product for. And I was, given what I did for a living, I was very successful at it, because it was stupid. It didn't take a lot of thinking. It was idiotic. I need more than that. A lot more than that. And that's why when I do my reading, I look to the arts, I look to philosophy, and I'm not going to reject any of that. And when you read the Frankfurt School or any of these other people that Rockhill objects to, all he's objecting to me is their brilliance. I don't give a shit. He can be a dumb bastard. He can be a kind of banal critic, who picks at this and picks at that. I really don't give a shit. I'm going to keep reading them. I'm going to keep thinking into them, and I'm going to keep thinking what I'm doing, because I get the same critique about my writing. because it's a deep dive.
Okay.
Let me make a response really quick, and then we'll move on.
We can move on to the world. That I just wanted to share. That is by no way a communist perspective. That is a conservative in Russia. But I thought it might be interesting to this discussion.
Okay.
Since it's sensitive.
Yeah, no, I think Rockhill's point is just that, you know, just like there's a music industry, there's a critical theory industry, and the critical theory that don't represent a threat to the status quo is what gets promoted. And that's the same in music. It's the same in critical theory. That's all Rockhill's saying. And I think he makes a valid point, but we don't need to belabor it. We don't need to, you know, attack Rockhill.
I know, but
that's the structural argument. Carlo is the literary guy. That is what he brings.
But one thing, I'm a lit guy here, but I'm not totally. Listen, we have a book critic here, Mike Durda, for the Washington Post, and he's considered like the best read person on the universe. He's won 2 Pulitzers. He and I disagree fundamentally about the Sorbonne in 1968, and he was there. And he is so conservative. He is so literarily conservative that he despised everything that went on during 1968 Sorbonne and the subsequent books that came out of it in publications. But he will not engage in politics in any way, shape, or form. So he's very culturally conservative. I said his appeal is to the T and Doyley crowd, you know, the safe literature that's out there, P.G. Wodehouse and things like that. That you know, basically where you don't get involved in anything serious, and that's been my objection to his critiques over the years. You know, he would immediately reject writers who interjected anything political, right or left, into their work. So that came out of his experience, according to my conversation with him, that was directly related to the Sorbonne in 1968 when he was there and he saw what was going on, and his conservative mind, it's very conservative, rejected it all. It would have nothing to do with it.
So let's get to current events, and maybe we can tie, you know, some of this culture war discussion into the current events.
Before you share the screen, let's just mention that I think yesterday, talking about the industry of propaganda, was when that fuckhead, Sean Penn's movie has released to streaming services called Superpower. And it was at the Berlin Film Festival. It basically bombed. Everybody said it was propaganda. It was what do you call someone? A narcissistic and basically empty and surface level. But that's released if somebody wants to watch that thing. And my morning yesterday began with watching this idiot saying people are just too careful. We should go to World War III because not a maniac, a gangster with nukes is threatening the world. I don't think I think he meant Putin. But, you know, a gangster with nukes, that really sounded like Biden to me when I first heard it. But that was an interesting wrinkle. But back to the world. I am so looking forward to tomorrow because Zelensky is on his way to you guys, closer to Carlo, to the East Shore, to New York.
Yeah.
He set what do you call it, landed in New York, which was very interesting because he took the Air Force One of Ukraine. I'll share a slide again. How do I, sorry about this.
So this is the Air Force One that's been in hiding.
Yeah, it was in, oh, Jesus. I actually saw the pronunciation of it. I think it's Zesol, it's called, in Poland. That where he was hiding for the entire SMO. He was always transported by U.S. military plane, including last year when he went to address, the Congress. He took a big flag with himself. It was signed by the fighters in what was then, I guess now it's just I'm blanking on the name. It was then called Bakhmut, and now it's Artemovsk because it's a Russian city. But there's not going to be any of that this time. He just flew to New York. He's not going to Congress. Maybe he'll have one-on-one little begging sessions for people with his little hand opened wide. And you know, this this fucking Green Goblin. I'm looking forward to tomorrow because today, maybe it's already happened. We haven't seen the news in about. I haven't seen it in 3 hours. He's in this general debate session of the United Nations. Really, not many of the big five, and by that I don't mean big countries, but the permanent members of the Security Council are there, other than Biden. So Putin's not there, Xi's not there, Macron, Boris Johnson, UK, none of them are there. But tomorrow is the UN Security Council session where Lavrov is going to be there. And the Associated Press put it this way, that may create unique spectacle. I can't wait enough for that unique spectacle. Every fiber of have they ever met? I don't think they've sat at a table, these two.
So tomorrow,
Lavrov.
the UN Security Council, you got Lavrov and Zelensky both present. So So we'll see what'll happen. The AP's hyping it.
Yeah. I mean, he already sort of primed this visit. Before he left, he did the 60-minute interview, something we can never share because YouTube shuts down anybody who shares even a snippet of it on copyright grounds. But he I thought it was amazing because Russian society has raised a second Hitler, were his words. That's what he said in the 60 minutes interview. It was just amazing. I mean, the way you can't call this a journalist, I forget the name of the guy who does the 60-minute thing, but he said, well, at one moment he was very giddy. He accepted a compliment to his wife, and then he went somber, probably thinking about the losses and showing empathy. That's the style, that was the transcript of this propaganda. He did that. And then he already initiated, that was also the Associated Press saying that maybe the UN should think about that Russia doesn't really deserve a place in it, in the different organisms of the UN. So that's his agenda there. And I really think this is coming to a crashing end. It really feels like.
Somebody brought up Pulitzer Prizes earlier, and I just want to point out that that's how Pulitzer Prizes are won. If you do a real great service for the ruling class by presenting Zelensky in a really good light and convincing people the greatness and righteousness of his cause, you'll get the fucking Pulitzer. So, I mean, I don't have a lot of...
Give one to Fareed Zakaria. He did the CNN interview last week, didn't he? I think he deserves a Pulitzer.
I mean, in the capitalist culture, that's how these awards work. They're not given to people based on merit or contributions to humanity. They're given out based on contributions, how well they further the interests of the capitalist class. So tomorrow sounds like an interesting spectacle.
The reason I say I think it's a huge turnaround in everything, because he came here with nothing. I mean, what Carlo mentioned that we watched a speech of Max Blumenthal he gave to, I think, the Ron Paul Institute or something, talking about Ukraine being the larger Israel, and he stole one of your best phrases, which is a stand-up tragedy. It really is. It's on his website, guys. He did it first.
I did.
And he also mentioned this amazing, look, we have captured Rabotine for the 6th time in 2 weeks. That's it. We've captured Rabotine. That was the counteroffensive going from June 5 or something like that. Absolutely nothing to show for all they call it a mountain of iron that NATO has built him. So he's coming here with nothing. And meanwhile, the contrast in the West is different. But at home, the cabinet of ministers in Ukraine just dismissed all the deputy ministers of defense, including Anna Malyar, who you might have followed. That girl, she was consistent disinformation. Whenever she says we've taken this, it wasn't taken. When this was defeated, it wasn't defeated. There's military strikes. No reason to go into it. All of these arsenals are going up in flame. But it's amazing that the new. 1 month ago, they dismissed all the commissars of the recruitment people in Ukraine. Then 2 weeks ago, Reznikov, the defense minister, was purged on corruption, and now he's in London. And the new defense minister is in Germany with the Rammstein format, the NATO Ukraine format, and it's horrific. There's nothing to show. And the Western press, what I see in front of me is like 10 pieces of real pushback, like it's terrible, everything's shit. And there's 3 or 4 hangers-on who are saying, yeah, we can do this. I can bring some examples, but maybe that's a bit boring.
Well, you know what? That's a great segue to the is the guy's name Colby? What's his name?
Oh, Eldridge.
In the
Eld
Spectator.
shit. I'm just going to find him because I forgot. Yes, Eldridge Colby. Now that Spectator article was amazing. The title is what is wrong with me? Yes. World events are not going America's way by Eldridge Colby, and it probably is going to get a lot worse very soon. That was like the second sentence down. And I looked into who the fuck this guy was, and he apparently was one of the architects of the 2018 Grand Strategy Defense document or something the United States has. And that was the Grand Strategy, and he did this book released in late 2021, November 2021, so just months before the SMO started. And in that, I think I sent you that screenshot. He pretty much described accurately what the China threat was, and I'm just going to read that because it's beautiful. This is Eldridge. China is a threat because it's on a trajectory where the U.S. might one day not be a threat to it. The U.S. should retain the ability to kill China. Okay, and the prospect of China evading this is the China threat. That's his words in his book. It's amazing.
Yeah,
it's
so
the strategy of denial.
China, just to be clear, China is threatening the U.S. by the possibility that in the future the U.S. will lack the ability to kill China.
That is the China threat, according to Eldridge
the China
Colby.
Threat. Like that's
and
from the mouth of the Undersecretary of Defense.
Yes, and now he's got sour grapes all over.
What was Henry Kissinger thinking? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's the real politic of Western imperialism.
This is the China in the 2008 world economic collapse brought on by derivatives from Wall Street.
Bailed the economic system out.
$350 billion to the West to pull it out of a financial crisis. This is the same China that was approached by Nixon and Kissinger to save the U.S. economy after it went bankrupt. Trying to drive the Vietnamese back to the Stone Age, as Curtis LeMay said. The lunacy of this is just you would call it ingratitude if these people had any sensibility at all, but they don't have. I don't know what drives them and what they think they can get away with.
In 2018, Eldridge Colby was one of the co-authors of this official document on, securing Western hegemony into the 21st century. And he specifically noted that China is a threat because in the future, they might eventually not be susceptible to, the West destroying it. Yeah. And that's the extent of the threat. But now, today or yesterday, in the Spectator article, that same Eldridge Colby has, is letting everybody know, he's sounding the alarm bells, that, oh shit, things aren't going as planned. So, this is what, we've talked about for 17 episodes of this roundtable, but it's great when, the intelligentsia of Western imperialism, agree with everything we've been saying. So it's just very interesting.
There are some idiots, hangers-on, like we talked about with Sean Penn, one of the absolute idiots. The other one is Mike Pence, who you guys have probably seen, that if Ukraine loses to Russia, then probably our people, and he means Americans, are going to have to jump in and fight, which I thought was ridiculous. Annalena Baerbock is another one who called Chinese President Xi Jinping a dictator, following in the steps of Joe Biden. But unfortunately, this is very different because China can respond and, call in the diplomats, maybe expel them. Another one was Scholz, who had these amazing statements saying that peace, also Stoltenberg said the same, not peace, but he said the beginning to negotiations is Russia not capitulate, but leave all of Ukraine. They have these. But the amazing thing is the other part. The 80% of the Western news is admitting absolute failure. And one of my favorites was, we can no longer hide the truth That was in the title of an article by Colonel Daniel Davis in Newsweek. You can no longer hide the truth about the Russia-Ukraine war. Isn't that fucking amazing? The average life expectancy of soldiers in the front, this was in Military Watch, one of these analytical military magazines, is about 4 hours. That comes from the US Marine Corps officer Troy Offenbecker. There's a lot of these admissions coming along. And even worse are the industrial sectors. And I just want to take a moment that on the same day, this was the last 2 days, I've just been paying attention to this amazing thing a couple of days. The US apparently admitted that China can produce industrially about 200 times as many ships as they can. And there was my favorite article, probably of all time, was because Russia just yesterday routed a thin-hulled oil tanker through the Arctic, the new Northern Sea routes, right? The Wall Street Journal came out with the best article in the world. It was, to build ships that break ice, the US must relearn to cut steel. And it admitted that, well, Russia has about 3 dozen, so that makes 36 of these nuclear icebreakers. And we have 2. One of them has reached the end of its life. The second one is always in maintenance during the winter. So I guess America has to relearn to cut steel. There's this industrial, bloody horrible news coming through. And, you know, they're just not prepared for this. The third one in a row, and I'm going to stop listing because I know it can get boring, and this was in the Atlantic, big Atlantic magazine. Ukraine isn't the reason the US is unprepared for war. The lack of defense production is. Like, duh. I think I've been saying for the better part of a year that the EU and the West has run out of the capacity to produce this crap. But
is that what $834 billion a year buys you?
I guess so.
Yeah. Sad state.
Good old NATO.
That number is in reference to what we've given Ukraine so far?
I think that's 110.
No,
I think that's NATO.
That's the annual U.S. military budget.
Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
It might be 934 billion.
I mean, and that's on the books. There's an on the books budget, and then there's an off the book budget, which is probably way higher.
Yeah, I mean, it had Mick Wallace quoting Eisenhower again about the military-industrial complex. It's so absurd. And they're just stealing the money.
But, you know, the U.S. is, according to Janet Yellen, on a sustainable course as national debt approaches 3 trillion because Biden assured him that he has proposed some measures. He's proposed some measures. Second headline, the U.S. credit card debt is at 1 trillion, is a sign of consumer strength. This is from Bloomberg. Imagine that same article about China. I don't think it would be a sign of consumer strength.
No.
When you have the printing press that creates the money, everything is sustainable. You understand?
That's what
it can go on in perpetuity.
I'm just going to make this point. Explain it if there's people in Europe watching, if there's anybody. Because I try to make this point to my friends who say Germany is rich, is always going to be rich. They don't really get this point. Not just the economic data coming out from here, but the U.S. reserve currency status means it can print out debt. Everybody has to buy that debt because they have to trade for energy, for rice, for fertilizer, using that. And with that, the US can go out into the world and buy shit, real stuff, industrial material, food, all of that stuff. And Germany just can't do that. And they're doing the exact same. They're going to print money. They're going to subsidize the energy industry, which goes against EU regulations now. So apparently they're going to have a spat with each other because, you know, everything has stopped. Just the latest in the German 50,000.6, so 50,600 German companies of great economic importance have completely ceased their activities. That's a statistic office in Germany called Der Statis, the German states. Ridiculous.
The global economics is quite complicated. You know, obviously, you know, the Germans can print their own currency. The British can print their own currency, and the U.S. prints its own currency. But because of the global dominance of the U.S. dollar, one of the benefits of being a U.S. lackey, like Germany and like Britain, is that they can exchange their currencies for U.S. dollars, and so it's like a lifeline the U.S. gives its puppets. But yeah, it's
except
because
because the euro is not the world reserve, you don't have to buy euros to buy oil, to buy fertilizer. You need to buy euros if you want to buy stuff from Europe, which, as we know, is going way, way, way down. What do you want?
What? I misspoke because Germany is on the euro. I was thinking they still use the franc, but they don't. So Britain still uses the pound. Britain did not go to the euro, but Germany is on the euro, which is controlled by Brussels, but it's kind of still controlled by Germany through Brussels. But
well, I mean, the central bank of Europe is not in Brussels. That's in Frankfurt. The euro is the Deutschmark 2.0, except you needed to build industrial stuff for that to be successful. And the latest from Politico was Germany faces a euro 31 billion budget cut, triggering coalition infighting. See, they just can't do it the exact same that America's been doing.
No, for sure.
There's real life consequences coming like a train at this moment.
I like the irony of that shot with Biden standing in front of the Siemens sign. The Siemens company, the Siemens plant had to move to the United States, and he's standing in front of the sign with this big, senile grin on his face. And his policies drove that country out of Germany to the United States, and he's like standing in front of it like
I did that.
They said pure American or something. The sign was
I brought Siemens here for American workers,
The sign was even better. Oh, that's the other stuff that's going on in the world. So while the West is, I think, on its last legs, there's diplomacy going on, and there's also military diplomacy going on. One of the saddest things I've watched this morning, and we can't go into too much detail because I'm just not that well informed at this moment, is the war in the Caucasus, meaning around Nagorno-Karabakh between Azerbaijan and Armenia a military operation has broken out, and it's just too soon to say anything more than that. But these are pictures that also surfaced. One is Wagner, I guess we call it group because it's not a PMC anymore, is training the Belarusian girls of how to fight, and that is General Surovikin. General Armageddon, who was one of the guys who really got along well, and he surfaced in Algeria, while in Africa there's a new coup, this time in the Congo, while the president was in New York. So that's a lot of these bubbles are coming out. There was a lot of backstabbing, a lot of diplomacy going on, but right now it looks like, hello, Das, it just looks like people are taking their chances with military conflict. That is in no way good news, but
But Ben, how convincing is the coup in the Central Republic? Has that been confirmed or
not Central African Republic, but the Congo? It has been confirmed, but it has been totally quiet for 2 days. Ever since it was announced that the leader of the presidential guard, while the president was away, has taken control of government, organizations, it's been just quiet. In the West, in the neighboring African countries, it's just like a ghost.
I thought it was the Central African Republic, but I may be mistaken.
No, it's next door to the Central African Republic, where Russia has the greatest presence.
Wagner presence, yeah. Okay.
That's why that was important.
So the president of the Congo, when he went to the UN in New York, that's when the leader of the defense forces declared a coup and said he's now taking over the government, right?
Yeah, and that's all we know about that.
That's all we know.
Far. Yeah,
but we do know that the president that left is the son of the former president. So it seems like it's the same thing playing out, where you have the compradors that have been propped up by the West are getting overthrown. It seems that way. So I mean, of course,
once more, it's a dynasty that's been there since the 1990 something.
Yeah.
And
then as far as Azerbaijan and Armenia goes, what we do know also is that it might have been that same policy paper we referenced earlier from 2018, but they talk about ways to put pressure on Russia. And one of those ways is to initiate, conflict on Russia's periphery. And specifically, it was either Armenia or Azerbaijan, which they thought they could kind of undermine Russian, pro-Russian influence and pro-Russian sentiment. So it kind of just does coincide with, Western, policy papers and Western strategy that they've laid out.
Well, yes. Right now, it's Armenia. I mean, the last 2 weeks, this guy. By the way, never trust a guy with a girl's name, and he's called Nikol Pashinyan, I think. Just like Nikita Khrushchev. Just don't trust anybody like that. The guy in charge of Armenia has been an absolute Western lackey. He wanted to get out the CSTO, the Collective Security Organization with Russia. He sent his wife to his beloved best friend to Kiev, which is Zelenskaya, the wife of Zelensky. He wants his country to get into the EU, to get into NATO. But this is, we don't have a map, but this is the Caucasus region. So Russia's interested, Turkey is interested, down south Iran is interested. This is not a place, all of the neighbors are going to be alarmed by this. We don't know how it will end, but what has happened since is he's been quiet, he's shriveled up. I mean, 2 weeks ago, he was like Zelensky, he was dressed in military fatigues and we're ready for this. And right now, when the shit gets to happen, he was like, I haven't seen anything from him. He was like, no, we want this. We're not going to go to war over Nagorno-Karabakh.
The president of Armenia.
Yes.
Okay. I did, yeah. I know a pro-West government came to power recently.
Yeah. Also, just a curious coincidence when it comes to this conflict is there was this big U.S. Armenian Eagle Partner 2023 military exercises going on between the 11th and the 20th September, right? That's kind of interesting. While this anti-terrorist action has taken place, that's what was announced, and also the closure of the airspace. That's all we know.
So it's definitely a hot spot to keep our eye on, and I'm sure we'll have more information by Thursday. More things will have happened.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have more info possibly on the huge fallout right now between Canada and India, which will be interesting. Still very fresh, but apparently Mr. Trudeau has accused Modi of killing a Sikh leader somewhere in Canada, and we'll see where it goes. But it might be sour grapes for India. We'll see.
So, so they've. I mean, there's been some political complaints back and forth. Did India recall their ambassadors or something after the murder of?
I think they.
Trudeau blamed India, right? Trudeau blamed India, and then the U.S. took Trudeau's side.
Well, the White House said that these are credible allegations.
Yeah.
So I guess that's sort of taking its side. While Macron, basically Canada expelled an Indian diplomat, which is high.
Trudeau did, right? Trudeau expelled an Indian diplomat.
And then India expelled Canadian diplomats. So it's not low level stuff. It's big level stuff. But the second thing I seen, which was from a big no from Foreign Minister Jai Shankar, which isn't on our list, I'm sorry, which was people shouldn't get into old ways of thinking. The West isn't evil while the developing countries are good. The West isn't the one that is flooding the world with cheap electronic vehicles, which is a huge anti-China turn. And that I just saw today. Sorry, I didn't include it in the cheat sheet, but there's very weird, maybe opportunist, but there's breaks and rearrangements in the alliance going on very, very fast. That's why I think we've come to a what do you call it, inflection point in this whole thing. Lots going on.
Carlo gets the last word.
The last word. And I don't have anything to add. Is it over already? Or we done?
No. We haven't.
Did you find the F-13 stealth fighter, the F-35 stealth fighter that the US lost for almost 2 days? Did you find it? That's fun. Is it in your backyard?
It's really stealthy. You can tell. Pierre Sprague would be proud. Sprague would be proud. They found it in South Carolina.
Yeah, they did. The remains of it.
Yeah, they eventually find it, but you can see how stealthy it is, and they couldn't find it for a while.
Yeah. Serbia wants to say hi. They had this amazing poster of the F-117 stealth fighter we didn't know it was invisible when they shot it down. So I thought that was amazing, the F-13, but it's $136 million, right? That's the Navy variant.
That's a bargain.
And immediately, this was probably a meme, but immediately it showed up on some, what are these sites, where you can buy and sell, like eBay, Yeah,
Yeah.
eBay for like 80 million, like a real discount. You can buy it.
Yeah, so they showed the actual price and then 96% discount, only 80 million. Awesome.
Yeah,
I do have a theory about the excuse me, the
35.
stealth bomber, and that is it's a money laundering scheme. And these companies, these countries that are buying it, it's a way of getting capital out there for this purchase, and then it's laundered through a series of bank accounts, and the money makes its way back to them
You
somehow.
described NATO perfectly.
Yeah, it's a boondoggle. Pierre Sprey was so vehemently against it when he was alive, and he was one of the major engineers on it. He devised the skin, the surface that was supposedly undetectable by radars, different forms of radar. So, and he knew when he turned on it, he turned on it vehemently.
And
Let me just say he's a very interesting guy because when I went to have dinner with him he used to have a house in the country in Upper Marlboro, and he was a big avant-garde jazz enthusiast, and he had a recording studio in his living room, and the way he got maximum sound, he was very much against digital sound. He was analog all the way. Was this huge full tape recorder, reel to reel tape recorder, and he had like mattresses and boards and everything around the room where he and his friend, who's also a close friend of mine, looked for the maximum acoustics. And what he would do, he'd have musicians, like in the case when I was out there, Joel Futterman from Chicago, this pianist, and he had these grounds, and he would have Futterman out, and he would just let Futterman walk around the grounds until he felt just right, and then they would go in and they would record. They had this excellent drummer, I can't remember his name, and they would record. And he had because he's passed away, but he has this label called Maple Shade, and it's got a lot of the most brilliant avant-garde American jazz music, or international, I should say, jazz musicians on there. And he had his own little setup where he would invite them out and record under these really ideal circumstances, situations. So he was a fascinating guy and a great conversationalist.
I was going to point out that the F-35, I believe, like most big product from the military industrial complex, I think there's a part made in every state. So that's one way that they keep these big programs from being voted out democratically, by making sure that every state benefits. And if you say, hey, we don't need that, then they're going to run somebody against you. Yeah, they're going to run somebody against you that is going to say, hey, why do you want to kill jobs in this state? So it's just
isn't that beautiful? I wish I had the statistics, but the NATO budget is something above 80% paid by the USA. And if you're like an outsider, when Trump first got into office saying we're not going to pay for this, he didn't understand all of that money comes back into the US economy. Yeah. He really didn't get that at that point.
That's what people don't. I'm sorry. That's what people don't understand about U.S. aid. It doesn't go to these countries. It goes to American corporations that are supposed to supply the content of the contracts, which they don't. Halliburton. I mean, how many complaints did you get about Halliburton construction in Iraq?
Yeah.
After the Iraq wars, oh my God, they stole billions.
Wait, you're saying there's corruption? Come on.
And that brings us up to another topic we should cover, and that's Elon Musk. Hey.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Carlo.
I was just going to say, what reminded me of it was that all of the Tesla parts are done by Tesla on the premises. I mean, there's no
They're Chinese parts. They are Chinese parts at this moment. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, oh God, the phone.
Probably your doctor. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and end the stream. Carlo's got to pick that up.
You can mute Carlo for the telephone call, I think.
Well, hello? I don't mind. Did you have something? I was gonna end it. We're at about an hour and a half.
Okay, then concluding thoughts. I wanted to say Elon Musk will wait until Thursday. We'll talk about him, I'm pretty sure. But the
Hold
end
that
of
thought, then, Carlo.
I wanted to say two things. One was the end of the F-35 hide and seek thing. Not that it was found, but news went out today, like 3 or 4 big Western media channels, that the U.S. Marines they issued a stand down order to all aviation units inside and outside the U.S. after this mishap with the pilot, and that is something. Somebody was spooked. I'm not sure what's in the background of that, but that's not what you do when a plane crashes and then you find it in field. That is something bigger, I'd like to say. But something in the end that would made me absolutely chuckle was the South Korean government. They what do you call it? They summoned the Russian ambassador. This made me laugh, and they practically just told him, "You should stop the military cooperation with the DPRK." I mean, just think about that. Then Russia
Who
should.
summoned him and told him that?
The South Korean foreign ministry. Now,
Okay.
somebody should tell South Korea to stop buying fucking US weapons for the better part of 20 years now, because that would be the equivalent to that. But just imagine the audacity, them telling the DPR, the Russian ambassador, that you shouldn't trade with the DPR.
There's an interesting fact about that I just learned recently. You guys might find interesting, but in the event of actual hostilities and a hot war between North and South Korea, the South Korean military will be under the command of the U.S. I mean, the general over the U.S. base in South Korea would be the official leader of the South Korean forces. So I mean, they're under a military dictatorship. I mean, they're under a military what's that word? With occupation. It's a military occupation of South Korea, and it continues to this very day. Carlo?
No, I have nothing. That's right. I mean, what can I say? You're right.
Who was on the phone? Was it important?
They want to buy my house.
All right.
I don't want to get into that.
I'm just going to say both of us, meaning Carlo and myself, had some bad health issues the last couple of days. So we kind of meandered through the big topics and then the world, and we kind of more of that and more detail on Thursday.
Yeah.
And I very much struggled to discuss my essay. If anybody wants to read it, it's quite long and dry, but it's right on my webpage on Facebook.
Put it in the description box for the YouTube.
I want to encourage discussion. I think these things need to be discussed, talked about. I think that's good, and I think it'll help develop awareness, which is sorely lacking because of censorship and the propaganda apparatus, etc. On that note, we will be back Thursday. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you, Paulie.